Start a few minutes late, folks.
All good. I think you're number 4, Joe. Up Phil's 5. You almost have quorum.
Brian's on his way too.
I almost forgot the sunglasses. I have a
There
spare
you-
one, Phil.
I was looking for you. I was like, is he here? There we go.
Love it. Yes.
I might need to go on a hunt through my kids' stuff to see if we can find better ones.
Here we are.
All right. Well, Clayton makes 6 and then Brian makes 7. So have fun.
I'll show with specs too.
Oh, there we go. You're outside, so it's not weird.
It's less weird. How about that?
I think we have the same haircut, or at least similar.
We do, yeah. Did you leave a long curl though? That's really the big question.
No, but next time I might.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Like a tail.
All right, Phil, are you leading this adventure?
Oh, I don't know. Am I?
I don't know. Are you the Basan? I thought you were on the notes unless I like copied and pasted you in again.
I think I was carried over from last week, but I can do it. All right. Here we are. I'll accept this. All right, topics. Zach C, third-party content in Kate's docs. Is Zach on?
I am. I
What?
just don't know is this the part where I start talking? How does this go?
Yeah, why don't you introduce the topic?
Sure. So recently, SIGDocs adopted a policy for how we handle third-party content. And the response to that has been, the response to this policy has been quite strong. Because there are some deficiencies in it, and there are some deficiencies in the way in which we collaborated and did not collaborate around the implementation of this policy. So I wanted to give some background and some specific context for why this policy exists and how to go forward with it. So the most immediate sort of locus for context is in Kubernetes/website. It's issue 15748. And this is the umbrella issue that we have for, that we're using to find instances of third-party content in Kubernetes docs. And when I say third-party content, I mean specifically references to configuration or products that are not part of core Kubernetes functionality. So this list is incomplete, but we're populating it as we go. So the objections seem to be the criteria. We have arbitrarily set the criteria to refusing to host third-party content that, unless it meets 3 conditions, that it is in the Kubernetes org, that it is in the Kubernetes SIGs org, or that it's in the CNCF incubator. And this is not a desire for purity. This doesn't come from a drive to have pure definitions. It comes from the desire to make sure that we are best serving users with information that is hosted in one place, that is accurate and up to date, and serves them well. And for a bit of history, I've put some issues into the agenda. An example issue is Falco docs, pull request number 14332 in K website. there's nothing saying that we can't add this to feature docs, and there's nothing that says concretely that we can. So this is an example of an unclear place. Like, what is the bar for whether this content should or should not be in Kubernetes feature docs? One thing in particular that we'd like to avoid is dual sourcing. Sometimes we find content that is from a third-party provider, and it's not immediately clear whether this is content that's replicated elsewhere, whether it is the freshest version of this information. And there are competing instances where sometimes the version of this information in Kubernetes feature docs isn't current. Sometimes it is the most current, even when it exists in other places. So this is a drive to provide clarity for users, to make sure that users are finding that what users find in Kubernetes docs is current, accurate, and helpful. So a particular example of why it's a good idea to link to third-party content rather than host is the example of Rocket. It's a comment on issue 15576. With the CNCF archiving the Rocket project, it's not clear whether that's going to continue to be a project that is actively maintained, at least not to me. So it's an example of if a project is archived for whatever reason, the people who maintain that project aren't necessarily going to have the bandwidth or the presence to come in and archive or deprecate all of their documentation. It's, a project's going to wither up and dry away. So it's a question of being able to remove a link rather than having to go through and analyze which content to remove. And likewise, there's a great deal of content that qualifies as more or less a vendor pitch. There are two examples that I've put in here. There are many more, but there are two examples that I've put in the agenda. There's pull request 15582 and pull request 9387. So you can see that this has been going on for a while. So the upshot of all of this is that there are no clear guidelines, or at least weren't until recently. There were no clear guidelines on what could and could not go into Kubernetes feature documentation, what the bar was for whether that content was allowed or disallowed. And what we did with this third-party content policy was try to clarify some of those goals. Now, that said, I think there's a great deal of valid feedback that we did not do that well, and I take responsibility for that personally. In 15748, I outlined some of the reasons for that. I think one of the biggest reasons is scarcity. And we have to start somewhere. So we've taken the feedback that we need to proceed, stop these changes right now, walk them back, open a KEP, go through the KEP proposal due to the scope of stakeholders involved and the scope of changes proposed, get buy-in, and then proceed from there. So Jim Angel, who is one of the SIGDocs co-chairs, is here as well. I'm going to ask Jim if that seems reasonably complete or if there's anything that he would like to add.
No, I think you hit it pretty well. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, cheers. All right, I think that covers it.
Okay. Hi, Zach. Thank you for explaining the whole background. Sorry how it went about. I have a part to play in that as well. So apologies for that. So I think it kind of like took us by surprise, I think, to see that. And when Brian went digging, we couldn't find discussion as well. So which made it a little bit harder, I think. So I just wanted to start by saying, okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
The holds, didn't really, I thought it was a PR and then it ended up to be an issue. So sorry about that. Brian, do you want to summarize? Do you want to say what you found, please?
Yeah, I just went looking for trying to follow the breadcrumbs to find the origin of how this came about, and effectively just encountered circular references. There were just terse references in the agenda and in issues and in PRs. And the policy appeared to emerge like a month and a half ago out of whole cloth, and there was no discussion on that PR. So, I just, and I checked the mailing list as well. So without having been in the room, I don't think anybody else could really be aware. Like even Slack, the archives, the links to the Slack archives just basically pointed to a one sentence blurb also. So there's just lack of clarity to how it got started. Now I was involved in docs early on in SIG-Docs, so I understand the motivations, or I can intuit motivations for wanting to bound scope and introduce clarity and fairness and that kind of thing. So basically I started asking questions to try to clarify the policy and how it came about. I don't think all of those questions have been answered yet, but I haven't followed the latest responses. My GitHub notifications are kind of a disaster. But for example, you mentioned Kubernetes core. It wasn't clear if there was a different policy for Kubernetes SIGs and whatever non-core projects is just an example. I assume that through the KEP, all that will get sorted out. And if people review the KEP, then we can make sure that those things are covered by the KEP. And I think that will just help bring clarity all around. I know this has come up before about whether sub-projects should host their own documentation, and I actually don't know if we have technology for that or if it's up to each sub-project. So some clarity around the current status of that would help as part of this process.
I think the intent was good-natured, right? Just the how everything executed was the part that was a little bit troublesome. I only got looped in because of, as a SIG chair, people were very loud and boisterous and angry to the point where they had poked me several times. I think I had like 7 or 8 red notifications on this particular topic. So as a community, the KEP process is our unified standard by which we communicate across SIG boundary lines, and it helps us to do that. I think when in doubt, it never hurts to file an issue with steering so that we can help to socialize it to get better traction and awareness with the broader community, to sort of grease the wheels, so to speak, before it goes out the door. That way, at least there's broader awareness so that there's less, freaking out that can occur in the community, because the community is so diverse and across so many different time zones with so many different groups, which have different stakeholders and operate in different mindsets, that making sure that they're clear about what is coming is pretty important.
I'd say even sending a heads up to Kubernetes dev about, hey, we're implementing this policy. Does anybody have concerns? Because it does affect kind of the whole project. I would just lean on the side of more communication to the other contributors if you're in doubt.
That's all good feedback. Thank you. I will take that to heart.
Right. On the side of like what do we do next, right? So am I right in assuming that you will come up with some sort of checklist that people can follow to see if the PR that they are going to propose will be accepted or not? So you essentially, put a sign on the door saying, this is what we're going to let in. Is that the kind of thing that you're looking at in the KEP?
I'm sorry, my latency is getting kind of spiky. So Dims, do I hear correctly that you're asking if the goal of the KEP is to create a checklist for content?
Yes.
Yes, that is the goal.
Do we want to dig into sort of, give you some feedback and sort of like what those guidelines might be and sort of dive into that discussion? Or do you think it's best to just sort of put a straw dog out there with the KEP, and then we can sort of iterate on that. I don't want us to rat hole right now on something that may not be useful for them.
I think the KEP would be the most helpful. Like Brian points out, trying to follow multiple breadcrumb trails through like meeting feedback, agenda notes, and like KEP comments would be difficult. So like centralizing those in KEP feedback would be, I think, the best way to go forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there is an actual document that outlines the content guidelines. There was just no discussion that was published around how those guidelines were created, and the KEP would serve that purpose. So I think they have a starting point for guidelines from that and from the other feedback that was received, and we can go from there. I think consolidating the KEP would be the most constructive way forward.
Yeah, I totally welcome having some clear guidelines here. I think that's a great idea. I think let's just make sure that folks aren't sort of surprised and that we get the right thing. So KEP sounds like a good idea. Cool.
I think I'd also encourage in the KEP solution of the general problem. So if like staleness, because one of the things I heard was effectively we don't want to have to remove old stale vendor content. I think maybe we can, if we talk about staleness instead of talking about vendor specific stuff, that might solve some of the problems in general beyond focusing on vendor or not.
I do have I guess a couple of comments to respond to that. I remember back earlier, we were very liberal about taking content, including other cloud providers and things, and I definitely experienced the problem of that content becoming inconsistent with other sources. So I think that's a special problem, which maybe staleness is not the only issue. I think the dual source or multi-source is definitely an issue where you can no longer tell what is the most authoritative or up-to-date document. So there is, maybe it's not just vendor content, but multi-sourced content is also an issue there. So I think that is good to cover by the guidelines. I think also once the guidelines have been agreed upon and communicating the list of documents that are going to be removed or changed, I think would also be helpful. So if the stakeholders or owners of that content can have an opportunity to do something about it, like copy it to another location or offer a link to link out to, or whatever the appropriate solution is for that content. Like I already started circulating some of the documents that were in that issue with people who either authored that content or might be interested in that content, but I don't know if that's a complete list. So, if there were some way to surface that, that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of the issues here is not just vendor, but hosting content for which we are not the authority or the authoritative source for that information. And so maybe as part of this, just calling out our goals for why we would host documentation that we are not the authority of the source of information on it on our website, of which there are legitimate reasons. But then that just gives us something to refer back to, like when we're debating specific policies, right? Does it meet the goals we're setting out to do?
Right.
And having that articulated in one place would be really helpful.
I think it's also worth recognizing that there's going to be some trade-offs here in terms of, usability for users versus having this content in line. And we should recognize as part of the KEP that we may be regressing to, in the favor of neutrality. I mean, just looking around right now, I think there's one page, I'll post it in the chat. Where'd it go? This is the Kubernetes doc setup, the first thing. And this has this huge chart of pointers to a bunch of stuff in the ecosystem. I think this is a great example of we're never going to keep this stuff up to date, and it's just going to be a lot of churn, and is this where we want to be spending our time? But this may be a place where, new users are like, okay, I want to do Kubernetes. How do I even get started? That's going to be, it may be seen as a regression in terms of usability. So I think we just should face that head on.
We might be able to mitigate some of that stuff too. Like once we know that problems that we're creating through this work, we can then address those problems separately.
Right. One another thing, a twist to this is, like, for example, the page where we have the list of the CNIs and the kubectl for each of the CNIs. I always go to that page because I know it's there and it's standard, and there's like 7 of them, and I can cut and paste from there. That's extremely valuable. So things like that. I don't know. We need a CNI for Kubernetes to run, right? And you pick one of those, and all 7 or 8 might not be part of the CNCF. That was one of the examples that I could come up with where it would be better to err and keep, in terms of keeping some of that stuff rather than nuking them out.
We can always create the policy to say this is our idealized world, and here's how we're going to look at new documents, without immediately having to, rip out everything that doesn't meet that policy, because, like as you mentioned, it for no other reason, people already have bookmarked it and everyone knows it's there, and so maybe it's useful for them. Versus documentation that's new, doesn't have that problem.
Okay, Tim's calling bike shedding on this. I think the KEP would be a great way to actually continue to iterate on this, but it's a good effort, and sort of we applaud that. Let's so that nobody's surprised.
And please do send the KEP to the steering mailing list, just because so many of us have trouble keeping up with all this stuff otherwise.
In general, SIGDocs is doing an awesome job. So thanks for all the work that you do. Sorry that, we end up talking not on your achievements, but on this stuff that ended up being controversial. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Back to you.
Apologies again. Yeah.
All right. It doesn't look like there's actually any other topics on the agenda for today.
I can just say one reminder, the voting deadline is 5 p.m. Pacific today. So if you have not voted, look for the ballot, search for CIVS in your inbox for whatever email address you have registered with GitHub.
Do we know what our turnout is right now, Brian?
I can check the number right now. It's 373 votes.
Out of
around 850 eligible.
Okay.
So that's, I think it's
43%, 44%.
Which is the same turnout we had last year, almost exactly.
Completely in line, yeah.
Within 1% of the turnout last year.
Yeah, we were what, 50% last year? Something like that?
No, we were 44%.
All right, let's beat last year, everyone.
I can't remember, is it okay for us to push this out on social? Can we push get out the vote on social?
Yeah, we're not supposed to take a side in terms of endorsing.
So I think just the caution, what we found with previous communications is that we got a lot of questions about, hey, how do I vote? For people who haven't been engaged and didn't read the previous communications, like all the emails we sent about, like, well, you have to be in voters.md and whatnot. So please don't send to social unless you link to one of those messages with those instructions.
Okay.
Apologies, all I have to drop.
Well, this is a good time to read the shout out to everyone, all the people on the Bootstrap committee. Thanks a lot for all the work that you have done. And looking forward to continuing all this, for you to guide us, those who are left standing, I guess.
Thanks for picking up the baton.
You're welcome.
I got to be honest. I'm so excited to actually see new folks get involved and bring ideas and energy. So I can't wait to see how it all pans out. Did anybody else on the call have any topics? Anything they wanted to bring up?
Come to the Contributor Summit.
What was that, Paris?
Contributor Summit.
Come to the Contributor Summit.
Oh.
100 tickets left. This is your warning.
And what do people need to do to do the ticket thing? Is there any action required?
Or where are the instructions for that, I guess?
Instructions on the KubeCon website. I'll link them in the agenda now.
So when do we stop doing this and get the people who are on? I had a question from someone saying they are on a wait list. So do we let the people who are active in the SIGs first and then wrap up at some point and then let the waiting list open up?
Well, the waiting list is active for new contributor workshop right now, and then wait list for those who have who are not Kubernetes GitHub org members, since we have so many and we have so many less seats for those. But yeah, we plan to open those up October, I think it's 15th or 20th. But I have a feeling it's going to sell out before then. So waitlist will probably not be, if I'm a gambling person, I don't think waitlist for current contributors will get in. New contributors is another story though.
Got it. Well, the only last thing I remember from today is the outreachy stuff. Paris, do you want to give a shout out to that?
We went live with Outreachy today, which means we have 3 open internships available. One for multi-tenancy, another for contributor experience, and another for cluster API. Shout out to Red Hat for providing funding for 2 of those, CNCF for the other. So we'll have some really good projects to present in the spring of 2020. But Outreachy right now has roughly 600 applicants that are looking at everything that's available, including the Kubernetes projects. What this means for you, though, as contributors, is you should be labeling your stuff help wanted or good first issue, because there's going to be new folks that are going to comb through that. As part of their application process, they have to make a contribution. So just note that the uptick in people claiming issues and things like that is going to increase, I'd say, within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Awesome. All right.
Do you have any other topics?
Hey, I got one. So for I know there was an issue open for diversity scholarships, and there was talk about the CNCF developing some process for people to submit for that, but that was kind of in flight. Did we get an answer back from them?
Okay, so there were 2 things. One is the diversity scholarship itself from CNCF for San Diego is already announced. The list of there's a bunch of people who made it. So thanks to CNCF for that. The other one was just travel scholarship for people we think we need there, like people who are working, who have a role in SIG release and things like that. For San Diego, what we had discussed was that if SIG release or some of the other SIGs have a need for it, it'll be a one-on-one basis. Just let us know, and then we'll run with it. But for the next upcoming summits, CNCF will come up with a program which they will roll out across all projects. I have to check on exact status of that. That was the intent when on the PR or issue that where we were trying to come up with a policy, but I have to go back and check with them.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Tim.
Great. Is there anything else before we close it?
I guess if there's nothing else, my name is Chris Conway. I'm new to the group, so I thought I would introduce myself. I'm a software engineer at SAP. I spent the last 3 years focused on blockchain technology. And through my work, I learned about Kubernetes and used it a little bit. So I think I want to spend a couple hours a weekend maybe giving back a little. If people have suggestions, are nice, live in the Bay Area and want to get coffee, feel free to say hi. You can find me on Slack under my name. On GitHub, I'm at Conway Cosmo. Or Conway Chris Cosmo. Thank you.
All right. Sounds like a great way to close it.
Yeah, welcome, Chris.
Yeah. Welcome to the community.
All right, Tim, you want to just put on the shades one more time?
I know it's the last sunglasses battle.
All right.
So we're gonna have to send them to Dims and Aaron and the new folks.
Maybe we can set up a Civs voting thing for who has better sunglasses. Just see if we can get a higher voter turnout than for the main election.
Phil's is better today, Tim. You got to give up.
I know. I just grabbed something that was on my desk. So.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.